We have textile artist and tutor Celia Pym today. Thank you, Celia, for joining us. And we would like to hear an artist's perspective who has been highly engaged with the Craft Council. So if you are ready, Celia, feel free to share.
Great, I'll share my screen.
Perfect.
Thank you so much for inviting me to talk about the impact of funding and support for creative communities. As Elif said, my name is Celia Pym. I'm an artist working primarily with textiles, and I'm based in London in the UK. I'm also a tutor in various colleges in the UK, but primarily at the Royal College of Art in textiles. So my goal in this 10 minutes is just to talk to you a little bit about my experiences and projects and collaborations I've had with the Crafts Council over the last 15, coming up for 20 years. In particular, focusing on the impact I think they've had on my creative life professionally. So bear with me for 1 second. So the first project I wanted to speak about was called Parallel Practices. This was in 2014, and it was sponsored by the Crafts Council UK and King's Cultural Institute. So the idea of Parallel Practices was these two institutions wanted to partner makers with healthcare academics or health scientists and academics. King's Cultural Institute found the health science academics, and the Crafts Council found the makers. And the idea was to put us together to see where the overlaps, intersections, interests in our professional practice was. What was it that crafts and health could learn from each other in the way we work? So I thought I'd talk a tiny bit about how this was organised, because it was very interesting for me. We were shortlisted by Crafts Council and King's. Then we were all brought together in a large room, and we all made very brief presentations. In those presentations, we had to speak about what we thought, why we wanted to partner, and what we thought we would learn from collaboration. Then after the presentations, we were just essentially left in a room together to talk to one another and to see if there was common ground or areas of interest that piqued our curiosity and maybe we could explore further. And after this meeting, we were invited to approach each other and just say, what kind of project could we devise together? What do you think are our areas of interest? We then wrote this proposal together and shared it with Crafts Council and King's Cultural Institute. So at this meeting, I met Richard Wingate, who was at the time head of anatomy at King's College London. And very briefly, we discussed, so his responsibility as head of anatomy is to the medical students. And also one of his responsibilities is for the dissecting room, which is where the medical students study human anatomy on real human bodies. My own interest is to do with repair and mending. And work I have done is to do with ideas of the sort of clothing as a second skin, as this meeting point between where our bodies and the world, and how our bodies might be able to tell stories through clothing. And one of the things that's very crucial to me in my work is working with real objects, real things that have lived a life. And it seemed that the dissecting room had all of that and more in it. And I was really struck by what the emotional quality of working in this way was for students. And Richard too was very interested in what does it mean to study science through real things, through these bodies, and what is the power of that versus studying from a slide. So we set up a very simple proposal that I would insert a mending desk into the dissecting room. I'm not going to talk at length about the project, but what I wanted to say was about this is that the Crafts Council really introduced us, and King's Cultural Institute too, and we were able to propose a very speculative project, a project that didn't have a fixed outcome. And that was really crucial for developing ideas and thoughts. And I should say, Richard and I continue to teach together and work together. We now teach a course called Synthetic Anatomy 7 years later at King's for undergraduate students. So there were unforeseen outcomes from this. In the first instance, we were funded with £5,000. And then again, we got funded a second time with a further £5,000. Here's some of the students. In the previous slide, you saw a student whose jacket had been mended and another student whose backpack had been mended. Here are some more of the students and staff who participated. The next sort of engagement I had that I'd like to sort of flag up and mention, and it's slightly different, was the Women's Hour Craft Prize. This was in 2017. So this was a really, really exciting prize. It came sort of to overlap with BBC Radio 4's Women's Hour's 60th anniversary. So it was a partnership project between Radio 4 and Women's Hour, the Crafts Council and the V&A Museum. They did an open call out, so really public open call for makers to put their work forward for the prize. It was a £10,000 or £12,000 prize, I think. Can't remember. I didn't win, but that's not the point. The point of this is that we were a panel of craft experts, came forward, shortlisted makers, and there were, I believe, 10 of us selected for an exhibition at the V&A, which of course was very exciting, because it situates your work in a historic story of craft. You know, it gave you an opportunity to see contemporary craft, it gave public opportunity to see contemporary craft within this longer story that the V&A presents in their collection of craft and design. But for me, what was super exciting was we got to be on the radio. So there were 10 episodes on the radio dedicated to craft on Radio 4 and Women's Hour, which is a very, very popular show, huge listening audience. With makers talking about craft. And what I thought was brilliant from a Crafts Council supportive point of view is it centred craft in culture. It was working to promote craft as something integral to culture, and it was doing it in a very large scale way. So I made this new work. This is a retired doctor in a sweater knit by his wife and mended by me. This was the work I was commissioned to do, and I put into the exhibition. But the reason I was thinking about it in terms of the impact, I mean, the impact for me career-wise, it was a great profile opportunity. But more than that, it was so thrilling to talk about work with people who were engaged with and thinking about craft. And this exhibition toured all over the UK. And I got to go to Glasgow when it was at the Lighthouse, and I did a workshop up there. So it also provided, I mean, a huge thing I think about developing your career in creative arts is connecting with your networks and understanding the scope and scale of what is out there already, what galleries, museums, institutions are supporting craft. And through this show, through this exhibition, the Women's Hour Craft Prize, there was all of that engagement with other museums, galleries around the UK. So it really gave a sense of what our network was, but more than that, it promoted it as being at the heart of culture and craft being at the heart of culture. So that was thrilling. Plus I loved going to the BBC. So I'm jumping back in time a tiny bit now. This is another project from 2005. The reason I wanted to mention this was an exhibition called Knit Two Together, Concepts in Knitting, curated by Freddie Robbins and Katie Bevan. It was fully supported by the Crafts Council. It was at the Crafts Council Gallery, which is on the Pentonville Road in central London, newly reopened. So I had graduated from my BA degree in 2001. This show, the reason I'm mentioning it is I was an emerging maker. And this show for me, Freddie and Katie selected me to be in the exhibition. It was with much more established makers, and that was thrilling as an emerging maker to be put your work in conversation and dialogue with more established makers. But it also, I hadn't really, to be completely honest, thought of myself in terms of textiles as the primary mode of my making, or the primary sort of heart of my making. And this show, the work was so thrilling and exciting to me that it got me really invigorated about art and craft and textiles. I mean, I was already thinking about it and excited, but it presented an opportunity for me to think about it as a professional field a lot more, which is really on reflection. At the time, I think I was mainly thrilled about the show, but it was a real showing opportunity. And it was, again, this toured around the UK, and it offered opportunities for engagement with the public and with press. And but more importantly, it presented a story of craft that was wider than the story that I had come to expect about craft, and particularly knitting in this show. So that was a very significant. It was what prompted me to go on and study textiles for MA. Through Freddie, I was introduced to the Royal College of Art. So that was pretty significant. This was the piece of work I submitted, blue knitting. It measured out a journey in a piece of knitting. And finally, what I would really like to mention in this last example, so this is about education and what the Crafts Council's done for promoting and engaging with education. So I'm a teacher, as well as an artist, and I really identify as a teacher. I've been teaching since 2002, as soon as I graduated, I got qualification in teaching, and I've worked in secondary schools, primary schools, higher education. The Crafts Council owns objects that belong in their handling collection. So these are objects that maybe are kind of in-between objects that were studies or development for an idea that they have acquired and bought. So they've purchased these from artists. They've actually purchased one of my works for their handling collection, and that was fantastic. So the Crafts Council has the handling collection, and Vanessa Rolfe, my colleague, and I were invited to develop in-touch boxes. So boxes of objects from the collection that we developed drawing and handling activities to go alongside them. And we took these boxes to schools and did a series of one-day workshops with children. These are primary school children, but we also did them with secondary school children. I wanted to end on this slide because I would say that the biggest thing that I think the Crafts Council does for me in terms of my professional life when I was reflecting on this is about hands-on experience, is about exhibitions, is about encouraging networks and a sort of situating the importance of craft in culture and valuing it. I would say that, of course, funding is important, and I have been funded, as I said, through the parallel practices and through the purchasing of the work, through the handling collection. But part of that has also been about funding things that are speculative. That would also be an area I would say is really, really significant, that the Crafts Council has endorsed as having value. So that ends my presentation. I'm going to stop sharing the screen. I don't know if you have any questions, Elif, or if there's anything you want to follow up on about.
Thank you so much, Celia. Such an inspiring work. So yeah, you sort of, like answered some of my questions, but I'm just going to ask them anyway.
Great.
Yeah. So my first question about your parallel practices residency.
Yeah.
How would you describe your partnership with Dr. Richard Wingate? And how would you, define this experience?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, it's a little difficult now to reflect on it because we've worked together for quite a long time. But initially, one of the things that was interesting about parallel practices was actually figuring out how to collaborate. Everything was up in the air. So when Richard and I first met, when we had this kind of introductory event, we said, we're interested in this nature of learning from real things, touching things, handling things, learning from real things, the emotional quality of materials. And then we met and we had to design our whole framework for working, when we would meet, how we would discuss, how we would monitor the project. And because what was so great, I would say, actually working with Richard, and was particularly successful for us, is both of us were very relaxed about seeing what would develop rather than looking for the outcome at the very beginning, and being very flexible. So I would work in the dissecting room, I think 3 days a week. So I would literally be there 3 days a week in those 3 months that we were funded, sort of like a permanent presence. And then, we might take lunch or something and share ideas. And when we came to write stuff up, we would sometimes write together. But there was a lot of overlap in terms of our approach to working, that the value is in testing the idea, not necessarily, and also in failure. That was an interesting conversation we've had a lot over time, in when things, he feels very strongly that science is very, he's a neuroscientist as well as a academic. And we talked about what failure looks like in science and what failure looks like in craft a lot of the time. But the key thing we ended up on was this experience for the students. What was it like for the students to be learning in this very special space and room? And we documented that with a bit of writing, and we did a bit of follow-up, but mainly we just gave them this experience of having things mended. You know, it sort of lives on as a story that there was a mender who came to the dissecting room. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah,
Does that help?
Great, yeah, thank you. It's like I'm also fascinated by the idea of this mending and your approach. So what do you do to involve public, the participants, and increase this engagement with personal damage items throughout the workshops? And how did you design and facilitate them?
Yeah, so it varies. So this has been an approach I've taken with my work since I was a student. So I'll give the example of the very first Mend event I ever did. I was first of all motivated to invite people to bring me things to mend because I was curious about holes and I wanted to become an expert in people's damage and holes. So I thought to do that, I just have to see these. I just have to see a lot of holes to become an expert. And so I installed myself in a gallery and I put a lot of clothes hooks around the gallery and I just sat there waiting. And I said free mending. And I just waited to see if people would come. And I think that's really crucial that you can't force people to participate, I think, in this kind of project. So a lot of the time I put the invitation out there and I'm really not sure what's going to happen. You know, I have a hope that people will bring me things, but I don't know if they will. And in my thinking, and this is also borne out in other work I've done, is you're trying, if people are going to show you things that matter to them, clothing, or if the territory is a little bit sensitive, sometimes people bring items that are valuable in some emotional way to them. You have to establish a feeling of trust. So you have to let them come to you rather than you saying, I want this. Like I think of it as instead of going up to them and saying, hello, do you have something with a hole in? Do you want to bring it to me? I sit there still doing an activity and wait for them to say, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? And then when they say that, then I say, oh, I'm an artist interested in holes in your clothes. And then I see what happens. So far it has never like completely failed, but sometimes it can be a little slow. So for instance, in the dissecting room, it probably took about 3 weeks before the first student brought me anything to mend. I just waited. You just have to sort of wait. And that was also a really great thing about our partnership is, because Richard and I both said this may not work. People may not bring us things. And then there's often like a snowball effect. Like once one person brings something and I hang it up and I display it, then others feel more confident about what the opportunity might be. And then they will bring more and more things. And to be honest, sometimes in terms of participation, people bring something with a hole in. Because I've followed this model for a long time where I just sort of, when I have new mending projects, I just sort of set up and wait. Sometimes people will bring something and then actually it turns out they don't really want it mended. They just want to talk about it. So then they go away again and I never mend it. So it has, a variety of ways of working. But for me, the thing is to stay flexible and responsive to the audience and to look friendly. I did it once in a van with Craft Space. They commissioned a project and we worked on it. They're a Birmingham-based craft organisation. And we had a hot chocolate machine, which was very inviting because people would just come and have free hot chocolate. And for me, that's also fine. If you just come, sometimes people have all sorts of anxiety or worry about craft, like they'll be forced to participate, but you don't need to be.
Yeah. So I have like a couple of questions about funding because you're also very successful in securing funding for your practice. So what support or funding scheme helped you the most, especially in your early years of your career?
Yeah, so as I said, Crafts Council supported me with parallel practices and with acquiring work. I have to be very honest, actually. I don't think I've been very successful in securing funding. I sell work from time to time. The nature of earning a living for an artist, and when I give professional practice talks to students, I talk about this a lot. It's very patchy for me. That's been my experience. My bread and butter money is from teaching, but having said that, teaching is very important to me from a professional point of view. I love to teach, but I would say teaching is my steady income stream. I've secured funding through residencies. I've had funded residency opportunities. They've been really important to me. Cove Park, which is a Scottish-based organisation, was great. But I would say maybe I make 10 applications, I get one funded opportunity. So, the ratio is kind of 1 in 10, I would suggest. So it's patchy. I don't know how else to describe it. I love that you think I've been successful. I'm giving off that aura.
It sounds success to me. It's like, that's
good.
So as an artist, what do you think about, like how and where should funding and resources be directed to develop new talents and support artists, especially in this post-pandemic world?
I think something... Yeah, well, I have to say from my own experience, immediately out of college, I did get a grant that supported me for a full year to do that blue knitting project. And that was, like Parallel Practices, that was quite a speculative grant. And I would suggest one of the things that's difficult for emerging artists, I believe, is having time to explore ideas and develop things. So I would suggest that funding should... small grants available for emerging artists to develop the work, whether that is practically or through ideas or through collaboration, I'm not sure, but that notion of speculative funding, so you don't have to describe the outcome right at the start, is really, really critical for emerging makers. And to give them time, fund their time, because they may be working other jobs to support their practice. And so what they really need is studio funding and time funding, and well, they can spend the funding how they need to if it's speculative. Yeah, that would be my recommendation.
I completely agree. So based on your experience, what will be your suggestions for young young creative designers and practitioners, and how important is to be part of creative communities?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the hardest things is that the commitment is yours in making a lot of the time. Perhaps that's true in other careers too, but you have to have the self-belief and stick with it. And what has always been very supportive and helpful and important for me is my network of peers. So other makers, designers, artists who are sort of in the same boat, not just to share about the hard times, but to also be excited about each other's work, because you're in conversation. Your work is always in conversation with the work of others. So usually that is my recommendation, is to stay open. I mean, you can't really go to openings in the same way or socialize in the same way, but I think socializing is really important for a creative life, and you need to go out and look at things. And for me, a hands-on experience is really important. And teaching is not for everyone, but I do think if you can connect yourself with that feeling of continuity, that you are connecting to a younger generation. And I don't think it's early enough ever to embed craft and making in learning. So for me, a huge thing is, this isn't advice to makers so much, but maybe it is connect with 5-year-olds, 10-year-olds, 14-year-olds and support them, so that you feel there's this exchange. You're not only doing it for yourself, but you're connecting and contributing to a wider story.
So yeah, once we talk about like the bigger picture, as the crafting technology for textiles project team, we are also interested in this global outreach of the UK-based artists, as you are, in the global landscape, especially post-Brexit. What are the mechanisms that are available, to support your practice now?
I mean, I still look, the mechanisms that support my practice. I mean, I still look to friends and peers. They're my main mechanisms that support my practice. I've done a few virtual studio visits where we've met and looked at each other's work online. I mean, it's very exciting. I was at an opening last night. A show just opened at the Wellcome Collection called Tranquility and Joy that I have some work in. And that was so thrilling to see that show open. So there are still exhibitions, press happening. The international dimensions are difficult. I've had a lot of shows cancelled, international shows cancelled. And one of the effects I'm feeling post-Brexit is difficulty with transportation. Shipping work is proving very difficult, or I mean, it may settle down, but that this year has been really hard for sending work outside of the UK, and that has deterred exhibitors. I think the logistics. We'll wait and see. I hope that there will be enthusiasm to stay connected on a global platform, because I love it. I think it's one of the more exciting things about creativity is a kind of international language.
So you are also shortlisted for a very prestigious award, Women's Art Crafts Prize in 2017. Could you please tell us a bit more about what opportunities came up from this new partnership with Victoria and Albert Museum?
So I've worked with the V&A, Victoria and Albert Museum, on and off for a couple of different opportunities. The Women's Art Craft Prize was the sort of biggest engagement I had. We had the exhibition, and then I also organised a mending event that happened where we invited the public to bring things to mend, very like the one I described to you earlier. I just set up places to install work and waited for people to come. It's sort of like a consultation desk in the middle of a room. Opportunities since then, I mean, the press is always very good. I say to students, you know, you really do want to encourage press, because it spreads the word in ways that you don't necessarily anticipate about your work. Press does have a good reach. I mean, the big thing for me was just that feeling that you are the opportunity to exhibit within the context of the museum is really important, because it established that feeling of connection to the much longer history of craft, and here's the contemporary work seen within that context, and as a result centering it as an important part of our culture. Yeah, I mean, I got a residency, I think, off the back of it. I think, did Cove Park had happened in advance? No, I went to the Penland School of Craft, and I know that I'd had an opportunity, I'd given a talk connected to the Women's Art Craft Prize that then led me to learn about this residency. So, you know, it's a very thin thread, but that was an opportunity that grew out of that.
Okay, so my last questions. I know you said you love teaching art, and our students, they also adore you. I know that. So I would just want to ask your experience, you know, like working with, how different actually the experience is working with primary students, you know, like secondary school, high school students, and postgraduate level, this college students.
Sure. Well, obviously, the big difference is where people are at developmentally. You know, that 5-year-olds are learning in one, you know, their emotional, physical developmental stage, versus teenagers who are at a different developmental stage. And then, you know, the big difference with higher education is that you're really thinking they've made a very personal commitment in a different way, maybe, to thinking about themselves in a professional context. But I would suggest that for all those students, what you don't want to lose touch with is a feeling of play and expansiveness in work, that the potentials are limitless, that the creativity is wide open. And to be honest with you, again, maybe this is, I don't know if this is controversial or not, I think that higher education has lots to learn from primary education in terms of play and not in allowing your in allowing your creative responses to things and staying open to your sort of emotional freedom within work. Higher education I love because our students are so articulate, and the ideas are forming a platform. Their work is entering into the field that I work in and that I love. So I'm extremely proud and excited to work with in higher education because it's developing our field. That is less evident in primary and secondary education. You're attending much more to the individual needs of the students and helping them make the next steps in their lives to hopefully maybe a professional life in craft. But I think with higher education, the thrill for me is that they are the next, they're entering the community of makers that I am a part of, and that it's building that family and that I hate the word network, but that network of peers.
Yes, yeah. So who challenged you the most then?
Oh, I don't know. They're challenging in very different ways. Who challenges you the most? I mean, it's so hard. The biggest challenge for me is teaching through the computer at the moment. That's all I can think of. That's my main challenge right now. And I'm grateful that we have it as a tool, but I would say that whether it's children, teenagers, young adults, mature adults, that's my main challenge right now.
Thank you so much, Celia.
Pleasure.
Talking with you, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Elif. I look forward to hearing from all the other panelists as well.